My name's Marnie, and I'm so glad that you could all join us today at Frankston City Libraries for our Frank Talk with Marcus Riley. His book is available via Robertson's Bookshop and also for downloading on our e-resources and from the library when we do reopen. Today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which Frankston City Libraries operates, the Bunurong people, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and any other elders of other Aboriginal communities who might be joining us today. I will hand over to Marcus. I'll just get him up so we can spotlight on him. I will ask that everyone keep their microphones muted. We've got quite a number of people joining us today, but there is a chat function down the bottom. So if you open up the chat, you're more than welcome to pop questions in there. And then towards the end, Marcus and I will facilitate those questions and he'll be able to answer them for you. So go over, cancel that one. Don't mind me, this is our first Frank Talk via Zoom. So we'll see how we go. Can everyone see Marcus? I can't hear you anyway, so it doesn't matter. Beautiful, take it away, Marcus.
Thanks very much, Marnie. Can I just get a thumbs up that people can see and hear me? Terrific. Thank you. I want to start the conversation by sharing my personal belief, which really frames the whole presentation and discussion this afternoon. And that belief is that we all have the potential to age successfully. We all have the potential to age successfully. And that belief I have has been formed over the last 25 years or so of working in the area of aging and observing why people have aged successfully, have aged positively, and perhaps also observing and recognising why some people haven't aged as successfully. And that knowledge and belief and the learnings I've acquired, I've been very fortunate to do so, and that's been through my work in aging both here in Australia and overseas over the last couple of decades. And I've been really blessed to know a number of older people themselves and colleagues I've worked with, which have really helped increase my knowledge about aging. And as I said, helped me form that belief that we all have the potential to age successfully. So to, I guess, explain and build on that belief today, some of the key things I want to go through during our conversation include my reasons for forming that belief, identifying some of the key threats to our successful aging, and the word I like to use for successful aging is booming. So the threats to our booming, the secrets to addressing those negatives, and to enable each of us to boom, enabling us to age successfully. And also looking at the opportunity that we have through this increased longevity that most of us will enjoy. And importantly today is really hearing from you in terms of your questions. As Marnie mentioned at the outset, we'll have plenty of time for questions while we're together through this webinar. So you can either share those questions as I'm talking through the presentation part of the discussion, or you can wait till it's concluded and then send your questions through at that time. So please feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to answer it, or at least share my view and opinion on that. And perhaps too, you might want to have some discussion about the COVID-19 situation and how that's impacting on us, and in particular on older people. So again, thank you to the organisers, to Marnie and Laura at Frankston Library for making this webinar happen. I really appreciate it. And also to each of you for making the time to link in and be a part of this conversation. I really value the time with you, and of course it would be great to be with you in person, but given the circumstances at the moment, this is the next best option for us. So thank you for making the time to be a part of this afternoon's webinar. I want to start by asking you to consider what age you are. And if we ask someone that question, seemingly inevitably, the response will be a number. So in other words, we will respond to that question by giving our chronological age. And obviously our chronological age is the number of days or number of years lived. And it's that chronological age that we then base, both as a society and as individuals, we base a whole lot of beliefs and indeed create stereotypes around particular ages, particular milestones in life based on age. And through that, we impose limitations both on others as a society as well as on ourselves individually. And we start to manage expectations based on that number. However, what I'd like to highlight today is that there is in fact 3 forms of age that we need to be conscious of and being aware of their influence over our health and well-being through later life. So the first, obviously, is that chronological age, age by numbers. The second is our biological age, which obviously is how our body is feeling. And the third one is our psychological age, which is to do with our mental and emotional well-being. Out of those 3, there's one that clearly we have no control over. And that's, of course, the chronological age. No matter how many lies we tell or creams we might apply, we cannot control the number of days we've lived or the number of years we've lived. And that's fine. The other 2, though, our biological age and our psychological age, we can influence. We can have a big say in our body and our mind. And the good news is it's those 2 forms of age which actually are better determinants of our health and well-being as we get older. In other words, they have a greater influence over our successful aging or not. If we think about our physical well-being, so our biological age, there's lots of things we can do to either maintain our physical well-being or to undertake in terms of a preventative approach to our physical well-being and the way we look after our body. Obviously, the things we eat, our exercise, the way we look after ourselves with sleep and certain other routines and practices. And even if we do have particular ailments, we're learning more and more about how we can manage those chronic conditions. We are learning more about how we can restore our physical capacities. So if we think about those measures we can take, we start to realise that actually we can have a really good influence over our biological age, over our physical well-being, over how our body is feeling. Similarly, with our psychological age, we also have learned more and more in recent years in particular how we can do different things to nurture our emotional well-being, to look after our mental health. And as I said, we are learning more and more in this space, and it's been good to see over the last couple of years and few years perhaps that we're learning more about mental health and we're applying more knowledge to our mental health. So again, it's important to think about the things and learn about the things we can do both in a preventative sense, in a maintenance sense, and also a restorative sense in regards to our emotional and mental well-being. Things that we can be doing to have a good influence over our psychological age. So that reality in terms of our 3 forms of age, and particularly what we can do about our biological age and our psychological age, is the first reason why I have that belief that we all have the potential to age successfully. Those 3 forms of age are important to recognise and be mindful of. And as I said, it's the first reason why I have this strong belief that we all have the potential to age successfully. The second question for you is, what do you envisage when you think of your later life? And more particularly, what do you envisage when you think of yourself aging successfully? So if you think about your booming into the future, into your later life, what do you see? What do you think of? What will it look like for you? And the important aspect about all of that is it's self-defined. So what I want for my successful aging, what it looks like for me will be different to the next person, and so on, as it should, because we are all different. We will have different priorities, we'll have different backgrounds, we'll have different circumstances as we continue to age and navigate through life. So it's important that we do grasp the reality that successful aging is self-defined. It's what I want for myself. It's where I want to be. It's who I want to be with. It's doing the things that are important to me and that I'm passionate about and that enrich me. And So because successful aging or booming is self-defined, that's the second reason why I believe we all have the potential to age successfully. So again, irrespective of one's circumstances, be they particular health circumstances, be they particular social circumstances, we all have the potential to age successfully because it's your own. You define it for yourself, and therefore it is attainable. It's the things that you want. It's not for someone else to prescribe what your later life should look like in terms of what you're doing and who you're with and where you are, how you spend your time. It's for you to define and then for you to pursue it. So again, my two strong reasons why I formed this firm belief that we all have the potential to age successfully, irrespective of our circumstances. One is because of those three forms of age and our ability to influence the two of those. And secondly, that successful aging is self-defined. So again, I invite you to be holding on to those reasons as we go through our conversation this afternoon. When it comes to our longevity, I believe we do have a choice. And that choice is really whether we want to grab hold of our longevity in our later life and get from it what we want and pursue it and embrace it, or whether we essentially start to withdraw as later life rolls on and succumb to the stereotypes and the negativity, and essentially through that wither away. And in considering that choice, we need to understand the longevity that most of us will have. The reality is that most people now will live well into their late 80s and beyond. And if we accept that, we then will understand that we actually have more of our adult life to live after our 50th birthday than we did prior to that 50th birthday. And if we contemplate that further and reflect on all the things that we have done and achieved and experienced up until that 50th birthday, our career or careers, our marriage or marriages, our families, the adventures we've been on, the places we've been to, the relationships we've formed. If we think about all those things that have happened up until that 50th birthday, and then we think about the life left to live after our 50th birthday, which will be a longer period of time, then I believe we have a choice to be really excited and positive about that longevity, that increased longevity that most of us are going to have. And then consider that choice as to how we want to pursue that later life, those decades that we've got to either enjoy or to endure. So my advice, my suggestion is that we really embrace that increased longevity that most of us are going to have, own it, plan for it and control it, and get the most out of it, get what we want from it, knowing that there will be different circumstances, there will be different things arise as we move through that part of our life, as there was in the earlier part of our life, and we navigated and planned for and overcame and embraced different opportunities through to that middle part of our life. The point I want to come to now in relation to our booming and in relation to our successful aging is identifying what the threats are to us aging successfully, to us booming. And I'll just put up a slide in regards to these threats so we can go through them. Just bear with me while I share the screen with you. Okay. So my belief and assessment is that there are three key threats to our booming that we need to be aware of. The first of those is negativity, and that includes both our individual negativity, but importantly, the negativity that surrounds us as a society in regards to older people, in regards to aging. And it really irritates me that when we talk about the aging of our population in the public sphere, it's talked about in a negative sense, about the grey tsunami that's coming and these terrible consequences that are going to occur because we've got an older population. My argument is that the aging of our population, our increased longevity, is actually humanity's greatest triumph. The fact that we've learned so much, that we've evolved so much, that we're now enabling ourselves to live longer is something we should be celebrating. It's something that we should be grabbing hold of and harnessing, because it provides such great opportunity for us as individuals, as well as for us as communities and as a society. Unfortunately, though, we have a terrible situation of ageism across our society, and that is ingrained across all areas. And in fact, it's a very casual or cultural ageism that we often don't recognise it's actually happening. And it can be casual conversations in workplaces, in community settings, even in family settings. And again, my argument is that ageism is in fact the last form of acceptable prejudice. And in past years, we've seen other forms of prejudice called out, and rightly so. Things like homophobia, like sexism, like racism have been called out in past years. And I don't suggest that they've all been solved, but those forms of prejudice have been called out. Whereas ageism hasn't really been called out yet. We're starting to hear a little bit more about it now, but it's a huge issue. And the impact of ageism is a very real one and a significant one, particularly on individuals themselves in terms of the way they view their own ageing journey, the way they view their self-worth, their confidence, their belief in being able to participate and contribute in the way they normally would. So we need to be aware of this negativity and the impact of it on ourselves individually as well as collectively. The second one is loss of control. And if you asked most people what their greatest fears are about getting older, the loss of or lack of control is always high up on the list, and with good reason. And the threat is that we end up with other people making decisions for us or on our behalf or in our best interests. We have less options and less choices about things we want to be doing, about where we want to be living, about who we're engaging with and what pursuits we're able to undertake. So that loss of control is a real threat, and obviously a significant fear for many people. The third threat to our booming, to our successful ageing, is that of isolation. And isolation really is that threat of people becoming disconnected, socially disconnected, becoming lonely, be that living on their own at home or living in another environment. That risk of isolation, again, is a great threat to our health and well-being as individuals. And often it happens incrementally over a period of time where people start to become disconnected, either through their own choice to start cutting off or because society imposes these stereotypes and negativity that people start to withdraw. And the threat of isolation and loneliness is, again, starting to become more acknowledged, to the extent where that in the UK 2 years ago, they appointed their first Minister for Loneliness in their government, because they're starting to recognise the risk and the impact of isolation and loneliness across the community, particularly for older people. So those three threats to our booming are important to acknowledge, important to understand. Now, the good news today is I've got 3 silver bullets to take care of each of these threats to our booming. So I want to move now to sharing with you what I believe are the 3 secrets to our successful ageing. And again, I'm going to put these on a slide so you can see them and I'll speak to them. So the 3 keys to our successful ageing, to our booming, positivity, planning, and purpose. So positivity clearly is the best way to address and overcome the threat of negativity. And positivity is really about a daily mindset, a daily outlook, and a daily approach to the way we live our life. It's not about necessarily skipping down the street with a gleeful smile on our face and singing and dancing, although if that's what you'd like to do, that's absolutely fine. But it's more about the way we view each day, the way we view ourselves, and it's about building up and generating a self-belief, a self-confidence, so that we can overcome setbacks that will inevitably happen as life goes on. Those setbacks will be very real. They could be a change in our own health circumstances or financial circumstances. They could be the loss of a loved one or people other people close to us. We are going to have those different sorts of setbacks as life goes on. If we have an ongoing or an underpinning positive outlook, positive approach, we will then be able to overcome these sorts of setbacks and continue living a fruitful life and the life that we want to be pursuing. It's about having an open mind. It's about saying yes to different opportunities as we grow older, opportunities to form new connections or new relationships, to learn new things, to perhaps pursue things that we've wanted to in the past but have never really given a go. So that positivity is something we want to have underpinning the way we live our life, the way we pursue our later life. The second key ingredient to booming is to plan. So our planning is the secret to overcoming that loss of control. Planning is the way in which we can keep control as we navigate through later life. And it's never too early or too late to plan. So by that I mean, if you're a younger person, an independent, healthy person, it's good to be thinking about the future, to be contemplating later life and to be planning for it. Similarly, if we only have a short space of time to live, I could be a 99-year-old who has 2 months to live, it's still worth planning for, because that's my future, that's my period of time to get from it what I want. So planning is about contemplating what we want, who we want to be with, the relationships that are important to us, the activities that are important to us, and planning to enable ourselves to continue to do those things, or planning for new things that we want to be doing into the future. We need to obviously adapt our plans and revisit our plans, because we might have a change in our preferences or our passions or our pursuits. We'll probably have different changes in our circumstances. So we want to be adapting our plans, and also we want to be communicating our plans to people around us, our family and loved ones, so that they can be supporting our pursuit of what's important to us. Also, it will be worth considering taking advice to help form our plans, whether that be legal advice, so we can be setting ourselves up from a legal sense. It might be financial advice to have a good sense of our financial capacities and how we can pursue things in accordance with our financial means. But irrespective of gaining that advice or communicating about our plans to others, it's important to ensure we continue to own those plans, that they are our plans to pursue our own successful aging journey. And the third ingredient is purpose. So purpose is all about being engaged, and obviously purpose is the way to avoid isolation and becoming disconnected. So again, in regards to finding our purpose or maintaining our purpose, it's really understanding what's important to us and what gives us that sense of purpose, that sense of self-worth. And again, that's going to be different for different people, as it should be. So for some people, it's the roles I play in my family that give me that sense of purpose. For others, it might be the importance of continuing to work for as long as possible, or to staying involved in a business that I've been associated with. Or it might be the roles I play in my community, whether it's volunteering or assisting others or pursuing certain activities. So it's important for us to invest time in understanding for ourselves what is it that gives us that purpose, that helps us engage with life, that helps us build our sense of value, our sense of confidence. Because having that sense of purpose, that sense of engagement, will see us avoid being disconnected, and will see us continue to engage, to make sure we are socially connected, again, in whatever forms that work for us. So for some people, that's being connected with as many people as possible and having all number of different relationships. For others, it's about a smaller number of relationships or engagements or pursuits. That gives us that same sense of self-worth, that sense of purpose. It's important to note too, when we talk about relationships, that it's not about the number of relationships or the volume of relationships. It's about the quality of those relationships and identifying the ones that do give us that positive impact, as opposed to some which might be more deleterious to our health and well-being. And it's identifying also perhaps relationships that we want to nurture or restore from the past, so that they are part of our engagement, part of our social connection as we move forward through later life. So those three key elements to booming are obviously the ways in which we address those threats or the risks to our booming. And I'm sure we could identify people who are living examples of successful ageing and have those traits. And I'd like to take a moment to share a story about someone who certainly in my life has been a shining example of booming and has lived their life in accordance with those three key ingredients. So this is a lady called Brenda, who was my wife's grandmother. And Brenda and her husband lived on a property a couple of hours west of Brisbane. And in her mid to late 80s, Brenda was left with a choice because of some setbacks that happened in her life. Her husband, Marty, of 60 years, had died. Her youngest of 5 children died suddenly through a brain tumour. And she was left on this property on her own. It was a large property with a range of animals and different things on it. Most people in her family really wanted Brenda, and in fact told Brenda to move into the city, move into a unit closer to family, and she'd be safer there and be looked after. But Brenda had a different idea, and she held her ground and really wanted to stay at her property in her community. And over the course of the next 10 to 12 years, she absolutely thrived in this environment. She ran the property on her own. She rode the ride-on mower to look after the grass and the landscape. She tended to the horses. She set traps to catch the foxes. She looked after all the financial affairs, all of which she had to learn after her husband had passed away. And Brenda was this great example of someone who was presented with a choice. And often at that stage in someone's life with those sort of setbacks, they understandably start to withdraw and do have a sense of negativity wash over them, and that impacts on the rest of their life. But Brenda was this shining example of having an underpinning positivity. She wasn't blissfully ignorant. She was a realist, but had this underpinning positivity which fed her confidence and self-belief that she could maintain her lifestyle in that environment and indeed thrive in that environment. Secondly, she planned. She knew she had to learn new things. She knew she had a big responsibility there in terms of the property and their affairs. And she planned to firstly learn new things so that she could do it, and then continued planning so that she was on top of all that she needed to be managing and looking after. And thirdly, she had this great sense of purpose. In addition to what she was doing on her own home with managing a property, she was super connected in her local community with different roles she played with community organisations, to the extent where after she passed away, the local council named a park in her honour. Such was her contribution to that local community. So Brenda was this shining example, and on her 90th birthday, she had a large party at her property with all the wider family and grandkids and great-grandkids in attendance. And each year after her 90th birthday, she'd have a similar party. And this is her arriving on her 95th birthday on the back of a Harley Davidson. And that photo typifies her positive spirit. And if you asked Brenda what her secret to aging so positively was, her answer was always an egg a day and a house with stairs. But I know there was a lot more to it than that. And it really was her living out of these three key elements to successful aging, of being positive, of planning, and living with purpose, and maintaining that sense of purpose. So when we think about those key elements of positivity and planning and purpose, we might ask, well, how do we pursue them? How do we attain them? And one of the key things there for us to be mindful of and to be investing time towards is, one, developing a greater depth of self-knowledge, a greater understanding of who we are. And secondly, to be future thinking. So to be contemplating and hopefully being excited about what lies ahead for us, identifying what we want from it. And in regards to developing that greater depth of self-knowledge, there are some things we can do to contribute to that. And it's really about investing time, reflecting on our priorities, so what's important to us, reflecting on our passions, what do we really like engaging with? What are the things that energise us and motivate us? And to do that, it involves looking back, obviously reflecting back on who we are as a person, what has been our life to this point, what's helped form us, what have been our priorities and our experiences. And then we're in a better position to look forward and to think about the future. And hopefully, as I said a moment ago, to be excited about that future, to be contemplating what we want from it, to shape it for ourselves. And then we're in a better position, obviously, to be planning and to achieve and maintain that sense of purpose. And through that, obviously, we then have this underpinning positivity that is just so important to our successful ageing. Before wrapping up the presentation side of the discussion this afternoon, I obviously want to give a quick plug or make you aware of the book that is called Booming. And Booming was formed through the knowledge and lessons that I've learned from people over the last 25 years, from older people individually across Australia and across the world, from people I've worked with and had the great fortune to get to know. And there's two reasons why I decided to write Booming. The first of those is that I believe individually we have an opportunity to really pursue this successful ageing. Given that we are going to have this increased longevity, I believe it creates a great opportunity for us individually to pursue the ability to boom, to age successfully. And secondly, that we have a responsibility to instill a more positive view of ageing across our society, to address this scourge of ageism and this negative stereotyping around older people and around ageing, and to frame it much more positively so that as a community, we are harnessing the potential from the ageing of our population. And before I wrap up, I'd want to leave you with a quote which I came across a couple of years ago. And in my work, we talk a lot about happiness, and I think it's very difficult for people to define happiness because obviously happiness comes in different forms for different people and we find it in different ways. But this quote really resonated with me in terms of our pursuit of successful ageing and of happiness. And that quote is, "Happiness is the joy one feels in the pursuit of their own potential." Happiness is the joy one feels in the pursuit of their own potential. So, friends, that concludes the presentation side of the conversation this afternoon. Now hoping to hear from you in terms of questions you might have. And I think Marnie is going to facilitate that side of things for us. So I'm happy to clarify anything that I've shared so far or to talk about anything you'd like to in terms of ageing well and booming, or whether it's about the COVID situation or whatever I might be able to help with. So again, thank you so much for being a part of this afternoon's webinar, and look forward to your questions. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Now, down the bottom of your screen, there is a chat button. So you're able to press that and the chat window will come up and you can pop your question into that. And then I'll be able to read them out for Marcus to answer. I do have one for you, Marcus, to kick things off. You talk about the impact of loneliness and social isolation in growing old. What do you think the role is in there for libraries and service clubs like Rotary, Country Women's Association, those sort of organisations in, I guess, battling that?
Absolutely huge in terms of the role those sorts of organisations and services and environments can play. Libraries in particular, I think, are just such a wonderful resource for a number of reasons. One, obviously, is the access to knowledge and information. Secondly, connection with community. So there might be relationships formed through being involved with those library settings. And thirdly, the resources that libraries provide, particularly to learn new things such as technology. So I know a number of people who have smartly used the library resources to start to get comfortable with computers and different forms of technology before investing in things in their own home. And obviously with libraries, there's people who can advise and help and give you ideas and information. and as I said, fostering those personal connections too. So libraries are a wonderful resource for individuals as well as families and groups. And other community organisations that you referred to, like Rotary and Lions, and there's numerous others obviously that we all know of. There's a number of great benefits or reasons why they are so good. One is they're local, so it's engaging with people in your local community. It's again forming relationships. It's part of that social connection with people in your local community, but also with a window to the wider world. And often in those sort of groups, we are participating and we are doing good for others. So whether that's a volunteering role or contributing to some sort of piece of work, so that helps our sense of purpose. So those sorts of groups you mentioned are just hugely valuable, and certainly great opportunities for us to engage with, to fuel that sense of purpose, that sense of positivity.
Absolutely. And Brian's actually made the comment that options to fulfill the goals you speak of are U3A and Probus. I found them very productive. Thank you, Brian. Virginia has said, thank you, Marcus, for your interesting presentation. I've just ordered your book online. Thank you, Virginia. Do you touch on the issue of keeping up to date with digital media and the ever-changing digital world? It is often hard to keep up.
Yes, thanks very much, Virginia. And thank you for buying Booming. That's much appreciated. Yes, there is discussion in the book about embracing new technology, and not just technology, but new ways of doing things and new ways of thinking about things. And that really is one aspect about a broader picture in terms of adapting. And obviously, as we grow older and through our increased longevity, we absolutely need to adapt and be open to learning new things, to doing things different ways. And again, the technology platforms are a great example of those. And I think they've really come to the fore in the last few weeks as we've had these social restrictions placed on us, where we've seen people for the first time engage with different forms of technology so they can connect with people. And I know with my own parents before the Easter weekend, we set up for the first time some of those social media platforms, even House Party, and so that weekend, Mum, who's in her mid-80s, was connecting with grandkids and who are teenagers and other members of the family in different parts of the country. And it was a great way to connect and have that visual connection. I think too, even with things like the streaming of television shows and entertainment, that our engagement with those can also be fuel for conversation and connection with others. So I know that some of us can be hesitant or reluctant to engage with some of those platforms because we might have concerns about security and personal information or what have you, but we can gain more knowledge to overcome those doubts and engage with platforms that do suit us. And I do preface that response, or I guess qualify that response, by saying not every platform is for every person. So again, it's exploring what is out there and what you're comfortable with, what is going to be of value to you.
I think that's also answered Sammy's question, which was, what about the role that social media can play? So looking aside from the actual digital security point of view, things like Facebook, what role do you think platforms like that have?
Yeah, again, I think it's multifaceted. One is information. So we've seen a lot, more and more organisations and businesses and other entities using Facebook now as their main source of updating people and providing information. So that's a great reason to be considering a platform like Facebook. Then, of course, we also have that ability for social connection. It might be reconnecting with people from our past. It's a very easy way to do that, and also a comfortable way for some people. It's sometimes a big step for us to ring someone out of the blue, or to drop in to someone, even write them a letter. But sometimes a little message on Facebook or a click to someone on Facebook is a good initial step to reconnecting with someone from our past who we want to be engaging with. And obviously a great way of connecting with people across different generations and different geographic areas. So again, it's exploring that sort of platform and looking at the ways in which we can benefit from it and ways in which we're comfortable in engaging with it.
Anne's also made the comment back about clubs and things like that. She said she agrees totally with finding new clubs, pursuits to get involved with. We moved to a new home in a new area 4 years ago and joined a local social club and have met so many wonderful new friends.
That's fantastic. And again, there's a club or a group that suits any form of interest. So when I mentioned before about it's a big step is to reflect on what's important to us. What are our passions? What are the things we want to be doing? And we'll inevitably be able to find an organisation or a club or an opportunity to engage with others in line with that sort of shared interest and shared passion. So it doesn't take too much to research and identify those, or have a conversation with someone to get advice about it, whether it's a sporting club or a book club or any manner of things. They're all out there and ready for us to engage with.
I know myself, I'm involved with the Country Women's Association, and one of my members, everyone always says, I can't cook or I can't craft. And one of my members says, everyone has their skill set and mine is cleaning up after an event. So there really is something for everybody. And she felt socially isolated in her 40s at home because she was a stay-at-home mum and no one else was at home in her street. So it really you can have those feelings at any age.
Absolutely. And that role of cleaning up is an important contribution. So it's not.
I mean, I didn't have to do it. Now, Colette and Laura have both asked, in your opinion, is early retirement helpful or a hindrance to positive ageing?
To answer that question, I would highlight my message about successful ageing being self-defined. So I know some people who have retired and it happened to be premature for them, and they really suffered as a consequence because they either hadn't planned for life after retirement or planned a transition. They didn't have opportunities to engage and maintain that sense of purpose post their career. So for some, it doesn't work. For others, though, it does work, and they plan for it, they embrace it, and they have ways of being engaged, ways of maintaining that sense of purpose after their working life is finished. So it's very much a horses for courses solution, and it's very much about, again, understanding and identifying what's going to be best suited to you and your successful ageing. It's been interesting in the last couple of years. We've started to see this gap year emerge for people who are considering retirement, and where they've had either the opportunity through their own business or a friendly and flexible employer that they've actually taken 6 to 12 months off and test whether retirement is for them, and then making a choice about, yep, I'm locking into retirement and I've got a plan, or no, it's not for me yet and I'm going to keep working for a lot longer. So that sort of thinking is quite interesting, as well as hopefully having more flexibility and embracing by workplace environments for more flexible working arrangements. So it might be for someone, rather than stopping cold at a retirement age, that it might be reducing the number of days worked and looking at a modified role. It might be more of a mentoring role or some other sort of valuable contribution to your organisation. So bottom line is, it's very much an individual approach to retirement or not, or when retirement. But again, hoping there's more flexibility and creative thinking in workplaces to support that choice by individuals.
Beautiful. And Katie's just asked, do you have any more advice for adult children in supporting their parents as they age positively?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very much about being supportive and not trying to impose too much too quickly. So again, it depends on people's circumstances, whether your older family member might be at a later age and might be frailer and more vulnerable, or it might be someone who is still quite independent and physically well, etc. And that's the different conversations based on different circumstances. But I do strongly encourage people in that role with older family members to be empowering, as opposed to trying to direct and make decisions for people. So empowering older family members by starting conversations, by stating your support and openness to assist in whatever way people or your older family member want to have that help, help guide people in their conversations or their thinking about the future. They're the important roles to be playing as younger family members, so that, again, we're empowering the older family member, not imposing what we think they should be doing.
I think you've touched on this one already in that answer, but Marcus, how, it just moved, sorry. Andrea just asked, Marcus, how do you best help an elderly person in their 90s who is overwhelmed by the threats to successful ageing you have outlined?
Yeah, Andrew, that's a great question, and I've certainly had a lived experience of that with my own grandmother a few years ago. It's small steps. Often the question like this is around perhaps changing a negative mindset to something more positive, or to unlocking some engagement. It's very much small steps. It's that daily sort of process where we're encouraging people to consider different things, whether it's an outing or whether it's engaging with a particular community opportunity, whether it's looking to learn something or to take up an activity that has been left behind, or picking up a new activity for the first time. It's just looking at those small wins that you can have with people, which start to build up that sense of self-confidence and self-belief, and in turn starts to feed that positivity. And then that flows on, obviously, to a greater sense of purpose, a greater sense of self-worth. So to best do that, it's really understanding who the individual is and what's important to them. So that's done by looking at their past, what's been important in their life, what are the relationships that are important, what's changed, and then structuring your support and advice and suggestions around that.
Beautiful. And Karen has made the comment that our society tends to separate older people by encouraging retirement villages and aged facilities divorced from other ages, and asks, have you any thoughts how this could be changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it has been a reality going back to the 19th century, let alone last century, that where as a society we segregated older people, and particularly frail or sick older people, from the rest of the community. I think we've learned more and developed better thinking about that in the last few years. Retirement villages, it's interesting to note that in reality, only a small percentage of older people actually choose to go into a retirement village. It's usually less than 10% of older people actually do that. In regards to care accommodation, that's a bit of a different equation, where often people have an absolute necessity for that care accommodation. But the question is still valid across both those areas in terms of being better integrated as a community and not segregating people by age. I think those who run villages and aged care services have been better committed at looking at integrating programs with other school groups or other younger members of the community. But we're not there yet. So I think we need to be looking at more innovative models where the provision of care to older people is done more in the community, and even where there needs to be care accommodation, that accommodation isn't standing aside from the rest of the community, that it is still part of a neighbourhood, part of a local community. So that requires a change in thinking from everyone, not just those involved in aged care and retirement living. As I said before, we've got this underpinning ageism across our society at the moment, and that's led to the way we segregate older people to this point. So we need to address that ageism. At the same time, we're developing better models for retirement living and aged care.
Beautiful. And Kim has made the comment, thank you, Marcus, for sharing your learning and offering ways to meet this process. She actually needed to leave and appreciated the conversation so far.
Thanks, Kim.
Now, did anyone else have any questions for Marcus? While I'm waiting to see if any come through, I'll just mention that at Frankston City Libraries, we do have a few online Frank Talks coming up over the next couple of weeks. There's a couple that are bookable now on our website, but there's a heap of really cool ones coming up, including the author of Bruni. So we're really, really excited about that. Do we have any others coming through? I don't think, oh, we do. Have you got any strategies or suggestions for combating ageism? Sorry, that's from Colette.
Yeah, thanks, Colette. That's a big question and a really important one. Probably best answered by identifying that ageism happens across all levels of society. So it's happening on a global scale, it's a national problem, and it's a local issue. So if we accept that it's happening across all those different levels, we then realise that we all have a role to play. So we need our leaders at national levels and community levels to really be driving a change in policy and better dealing with discrimination and those sorts of problems. The last several years I've been a strong advocate at the United Nations for a convention to protect the rights of older people, such as we have for people with a disability and for children and for women, and rightly so on all those counts, but we need one for older people. on a local level and even a family level, it's being mindful of the conversations that we're having that often can be exhibiting that discrimination or that ageism. It can be the way in which we exclude people, often quite innocently, or it might be more ignorantly, but it happens so often. So it's including older people more genuinely. It's having greater patience for older people. It's promoting the fact that older people have the right and the ability to participate and contribute as everybody else does. So if we as individuals can take on that responsibility to be promoting that right and that opportunity for older people, then we can hopefully see that build up to the upper echelons of society so we can get better decisions at that policy level.
Beautiful. And Sue's also commented, very interesting thinking. Thank you, Marcus. Julianne, what was the very first seed that made you pursue this topic?
The first what, sorry?
The very first seed.
Seed. In terms of writing the book, it was just having some time to think a few years ago when I was reflecting on my career to date. And to be honest, what sparked that was a conversation with then Prime Minister Julia Gillard. So during the election campaign in 2010, the Prime Minister spent a day with our community I was involved in here in Brisbane. And at the end of the day, she asked me how I first got involved in this area of ageing. And without thinking, my response was, well, I had a great relationship with my 4 grandparents. And when I reflected on the conversation, I thought, oh, that wasn't what she was asking. She was asking about my career and study and all this sort of thing. But I reflected on my response, which was very instinctive. And through that reflection, I realised that I've had this great fortune of having relationships with older people since a very young age. And then I've had this great fortune since I was 17 to be working in the area of ageing. So through that reflection, I started to think, well, I've learned a number of things over that time. How do I best share that learning and that knowledge? And coupled with that recognition that we've got this problem of ageism as our population is aging. So those sort of realisations came together to form a plan to write Booming and to share the things I've learned over the last 25 years or so.
Wonderful. And Virginia has commented that she noticed a post on Facebook today with an article by Andrew Solomon called The Middle of Things, Advice for Young Writers. It caught my interest with its introduction, which talks about ageing being a surprising experience. I always think that the most striking thing about ageing is how unexpected it is. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's true whether we think about ageing on a daily basis or whether we look at it over a longer span. And we realise, and I think we can view that as one of the positives, that there is going to be unexpected things evolve and unexpected opportunities. And that's where planning, again, comes to the fore, that we can be looking forward and then adapting as we go.
Beautiful. And Brian and Susan have sent their thanks, as has Marion King. So thank you, all of you, for joining us. We do have, I'll say, maybe 2 last questions. Marcus, have you observed, this is from Sammy, other countries that are doing a better job?
Yeah, really great question, Sammy. And the answer is that there's good things happening in all places and some not so good things happening in all places. So no one country or one region of the world has got it perfect at the moment in terms of better enabling successful ageing. But there are things from different cultures that we can learn, whether it's the cultures in more developing parts of the world where there's this often a great respect for older people and a belief in the role of family. And then in other parts of the world, it might be the resources and opportunities that are being created for older people. But the balance to that is that we've also got negative aspects in all regions too. And the issue of ageism, discrimination, the way older people are viewed and the way ageing is viewed negatively is unfortunately common across the globe. So I've had the opportunity to identify some of those learnings from other cultures and other countries, but at the same time seeing where things aren't working. And from an Australian point of view, we do many things really well and we've got some great systems in place, but we also have these problems and this negativity and this ageism. So more for us to do, and we can benefit from looking at some of these zones around the world that foster ageing in a better way.
And talking about it from a localised point of view here in Australia, Laurie has just asked, does our Indigenous community have this issue with ageism?
Yes, well, there's a different level of problem or type of problem, I guess, in regards to our Indigenous culture, where they're not attaining the longevity that the rest of our community is, and that's a problem that needs to be addressed in its own right. So ageism within the Aboriginal culture is something probably to be considered a little bit differently, because as we know, traditionally there's been great respect for elders within the Indigenous culture. And again, that's an opportunity for us to learn from. But it's how we address the health issues and issues that are leading to this gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous life expectancy. So again, there's an intertwining of issues there that we need to be looking at as a society and certainly as communities.
Absolutely. Well, that's it from us today. So I'd like to have you all join me in thanking Marcus for a little bit of a virtual clap. It's a bit weird not having it in person. Please keep safe, everybody. Thanks again, Marcus. It's been absolutely fantastic. This is the second time I've heard it this week, and I've enjoyed it for the second time. So thank you.
Thank you, Marnie. And thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time to be a part of the discussion this afternoon. I hope it's been of some benefit. I've really enjoyed it in a different way to being in the same room as you, but thanks for the questions and the kind feedback, and I wish you all well, and hopefully see you at some stage face-to-face at an event in Frankston in the future.
Absolutely. So please look out for each other, and we look forward to seeing you all in our libraries when we're able to reopen. So please stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.